All right, guys, now we're to the really hardcore four ideologies that we're really going to talk about. Some of these are kind of a combination of an ideology, and some of these are kind of a combination of an ideology, a political ideology, and an economic system or a system of organization. So let's start off with number one on our list, capitalism. Okay, so what is capitalism? Do we have capitalism anywhere in the world? Capitalism, by its nature, is almost a completely and totally deregulated system where prices are decided by supply and demand. There's very little intervention by the government, if any at all. And it is behavior in a capitalist system is driven by profit driven behavior, profit seeking behavior. Okay. So in the United States, do we have pure capitalism? The answer to that question is no. We have heavily regulated markets, what you can and cannot trade. We have antitrust legislation where it tries to break up monopolies to where one person cannot have an incredibly dominant possession of the market. So, companies like Microsoft, who essentially controlled the computer industry for a really long period of time, when they act in inappropriate ways, like they did with Netscape, for example, the government can step in and regulate and restrict, or in Microsoft's case, if you study the Netflix case, they forced them to break up. So, like, when we talk about capitalism, that's what I want you to focus on: is an absolutely free market, a situation where everything is determined by the invisible hand, meaning that markets determine supply and demand, they determine prices. And there's very little intervention with the government. Now, that is pure capitalism. We do not have it in the United States. We have laws protecting monopolies, things like that. But in a capitalist system, in theory, it's supposed to operate on a meritocracy, meaning that those who put in the work and succeed are those who succeed, and those that do not fail. If one company produces a mousetrap that is better, if company A produces a mousetrap that is better than company B's mousetrap, company B fails, and everybody's okay with that. Okay, so what I want you to be thinking about as you're reading this and reading the four essential kind of points below, what I want you to think about is simply, which system would I want to exist in? What are the pluses and minuses of either? One thing I always like to talk about with capitalism is that when everybody is seeking their own profits, there does tend to be a problem with, how do we address issues that affect everyone in a capitalist system? How do we, if everybody is being driven by profit, where is the appeal to reach beyond just profit-seeking behavior and think about what is better for the collective good? Does this happen under capitalism sometimes? Absolutely, but it is kind of fundamentally opposed to the nature of the system itself. Okay, so that's something to think about. Like I've said in previous situations, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I just want you to understand these systems, and you're going to come to your own conclusions. Okay, next, let's talk about socialism. Now, for our purposes here, guys, you can take entire graduate studies on all of this stuff. That's totally fine. But for our purposes here, I just want you to understand the basics of these ideologies. Now, for socialism, for example, what does it mean exactly? If you Google it right now, you're going to get different definitions, many of which aren't really totally accurate because they kind of go to the extreme version of socialism, where the government controls every aspect of the means of production. There's, private companies you don't have private companies owning any means of production, etc. Everything is very organized from the government, from a central standpoint. The simple truth is that does not match what we call socialism across the broad spectrum. Does the United States have socialism? You can make very strong arguments that there are elements of socialism all over the United States, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, fire services, police services. All of these things are examples of a socialist sort of structure where individuals pay taxes into a system, into a government, and a government redistributes them from a centrally planned idea. They provide us services. So all of that is a degree of socialism, okay? But when you go to, like, say, the Nordic countries, okay, Norway, Sweden, etc., those types of countries, when you go there, everybody there pays, in general, a higher tax burden, but they get more services than we do here in the United States for free. In general, healthcare is free in these countries. college education or higher education is free in those countries. All right. There is a wider social safety net. Basic services are provided at a greater level than we do here in the United States, but they also pay a much higher burden, a much higher tax burden. When we think about socialism, one thing that you could think is either a positive or a negative is when things are being more collectively determined, whether it's the version of socialism in the United States or if it's the version in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, etc. It does make it sometimes easier to see the long-term goal and plan for what is better for the collective when everything is not being driven by what is profitable. So one of the ways that I want you to sort of understand this is we're going to watch this video below. So as you scroll down just under socialism, you're going to see this Sweden's trash to treasure model. And I want you to simply ask yourself, would this be likely to have happened in a capitalist system? Would there have, because when you look at the system, it's going to start in the 1970s, and now to this day, it's making about $100 million a year in profit. Would capitalism have had the vision or the willingness to put up the investment to create the infrastructure for the long-term gain? And that's where this collective idea that you see under socialism light, as we'll call it, your democratic socialist countries. That's where there appear, you can argue that there are some significant advantages over capitalism. Okay, so